In 1946, an engineer rented a tin shed in the remote town of Hope, Arkansas. Population? Fewer than 10,000 people. No investors, no venture capital funds, no marketing strategy. Just one man, a stack of plywood, a set of tools, and absolute certainty that everything he had heard from loudspeakers up to that moment had been a monstrous, unacceptable lie. That man's name was Paul Wilbur Klipsch, and he spent the next 56 years proving that sound could be reproduced honestly. His speakers eventually ended up in the club that invented the modern disco. Rockefeller bought his acoustic systems. His speakers played at parties in an ordinary New York apartment, and those very parties became the prototype for every nightclub on the planet. And Paul Klipsch himself attended every industry conference with a small badge hidden under the lapel of his jacket. Whenever some competitor started talking about their revolutionary technologies, he would silently unbutton the lapel, show the badge, and walk away. What was written on that badge? You'll find out soon. Paul Klipsch was born in 1904 in Elkhart, Indiana. His father was a mechanical engineering professor at Purdue University. His mother was a housewife. When Paul was 12, his father died, and the family moved to El Paso, Texas. There, the boy who had grown up surrounded by engineering blueprints discovered radio. At 15, a year before the first commercial radio station in American history went on the air in Pittsburgh, Paul Klipsch built his own radio receiver, not from instructions, by himself, from whatever materials he had on hand. Around the same time, he played cornet in the school orchestra, was an amateur shortwave radio operator, and was completely convinced that one day he would attend a good engineering school. And he did. New Mexico State University, where he made the honor roll all 4 years. After university, Paul Klipsch worked in Chile at nitrate mines, studied geophysics, flew airplanes, and served in the military. He was the kind of person who never sat still and never did one thing when he could do 5. In the end, he earned patents not only in acoustics, but also in geophysics and ballistics, 23 patents in a single lifetime. But there was one thing that tormented him all that time. Music coming from loudspeakers sounded wrong. This wasn't a subjective impression, it was an engineering fact that Paul Klipsch formulated for himself back in 1930 while working in Chile, when he accidentally compared 2 radio receivers, one with a cone speaker, the other with a horn speaker. The horn sounded better, significantly better. The question was, why? And what would happen if the same principle were applied to a full-sized loudspeaker system? The standard loudspeaker of that era converted electrical energy into sound with an efficiency of about 1%. 1%. 99% of the power disappeared into heat, cabinet vibrations, into nothingness. The horn principle made it possible to raise that efficiency to 40 or even 50%. This wasn't just a technical detail, it was a different philosophy of sound. In 1941, Paul Klipsch found himself at a military testing ground in Hope, Arkansas. The location wasn't his choice, the Army decided. But something clicked there, in this forgotten town amid cotton fields. The testing ground closed. The war ended. Most people went home. Paul Klipsch stayed. He rented a tin shed, paid the rent, bought plywood, and began building what he had been thinking about for the previous 15 years. The idea was absurdly bold. Klipsch wanted to create a speaker system that used the corner of a room as an extension of the horn. Walls were not an obstacle. Walls were part of the instrument. A low-frequency horn inside a cabinet physically could not be made large enough to reproduce deep bass. It would have had to be the size of a room. But if you place the speaker in a corner where 2 walls and the floor met, the corner itself became an extension of the horn. He assembled the first prototype alone, the first 12 speakers as well. He received the patent in 1945, registered the company in 1948. During all this time, his wife Belle worked as the secretary, while he personally traveled across the country selling speakers. That's how the Klipsch horn was born, the corner horn speaker system still hand-built today in the same town of Hope. It is the only loudspeaker system in the world that has remained in continuous production for more than 70 years. No other model from any other manufacturer can say that about itself. But before the story moves on, here's a small technical detail that explains why audiophiles around the world are still willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars for Klipsch speakers. Most loudspeakers have sensitivity ratings in the range of 85 to 95 decibels per watt. That means feed in 1 watt of power, get 85 to 95 decibels. The Klipsch horn produces 106 decibels from a single watt. But this still isn't the main paradox of the story. The main paradox is that Paul Klipsch's most recognizable product was originally not intended for home use. In 1957, Klipsch designed a new speaker, compact, three-way, with no need to place it in a corner. One colleague, upon hearing about it, said to his face, "Paul, designing a speaker without corner placement is real acoustic heresy." Klipsch thought for a second and replied, "Excellent, that's what we'll call it." Heresy appeared on the market that same year and eventually became one of the most popular speakers in the company's history. It was installed in churches, university lecture halls, recording studios, and all that time it was officially called Heresy. 2 years later, in 1959, Cornwall appeared, a speaker Klipsch envisioned as the big brother of the Heresy, large enough to function as a central channel between a pair of Klipsch horns, but without the requirement for corner placement. A 15-inch woofer, horn-loaded mid-range, horn tweeter, Cornwall sounded so convincing that it quickly outgrew the role of a center channel and became a standalone stereo pair. Among audiophiles, it is still considered the most versatile model in the lineup, not as demanding of the room as the Klipsch horn, not as bulky as the La Scala, yet with the same signature character of lively, unrestrained sound. Incidentally, it was during this period that Klipsch finally became the first choice for those building systems around tube amplifiers. The tubes gave the speakers a soft, uncompressed presentation, and the speakers gave the tubes the ability to fully reveal themselves. It was symbiosis, not compromise. By the beginning of the 1960s, Klipsch had a small but respected company, several product lines, and a reputation as a man who refused to compromise. That made him inconvenient for the market, but indispensable for those who truly understood sound. In 1959, at the American National Exhibition in Moscow, the very same one where Vice President Nixon debated Khrushchev in the kitchen of a model home, Klipsch demonstrated his systems in the American Pavilion. There stood a Klipsch horn and Heresy in a 3-channel configuration. Soviet engineers listened in disbelief. American officials were thrilled. Klipsch himself, apparently, was dissatisfied with the room acoustics. In 1963, he received an unusual commission. Arkansas gubernatorial candidate Winthrop Rockefeller, yes, that Rockefeller, descendant of the oil dynasty, wanted a sound system for his campaign, something powerful enough to project from the roof of a car onto the street. Klipsch designed a new speaker. He called it La Scala, after the Milan Opera House. It was a political loudspeaker with a name printed usually on opera posters. La Scala turned out to be so good that people started buying it for their homes. Around the same time, the lineup gained the Belle Klipsch, a model Paul Klipsch named after his wife. Symmetrical cabinet, centrally positioned high-frequency horn, fine wood veneer. In sound, almost a Klipsch horn, but without the strict corner placement requirement. In appearance, furniture you wouldn't be ashamed to place in a living room. Audiophiles quickly found the ideal role for it. A bell Klipsch between two Klipschorns created a three-channel system in which all three speakers were horn-loaded, all from the same family, and all sounded like a single whole. Those who heard such a configuration said it was the closest thing to a live concert you could have at home. All this time, Paul Klipsch remained himself. He was a living paradox, a man who made products for lovers of silence and proper sound, while also being astonishingly loud in his opinions. His reputation worked for him. Stories circulated throughout the industry. One said that he once read an ad for a competitor claiming their speaker broke the laws of physics in some supposedly positive way. Klipsch read it, set the magazine aside, and ordered a small pin that said, "No bullshit." He wore it under his suit lapel. At industry conferences, whenever another representative from some audio company started talking about their breakthrough technologies that contradicted physics, Klipsch would silently unbutton his jacket, show the pin, and walk away. He described his philosophy simply: "My theories on sound reproduction will only be disproven when the laws of physics change." It wasn't arrogance, it was the confidence of a man who had spent 20 years mathematically testing every idea before embodying it in wood and metal. And now the most unexpected twist in this story, because in 1970, something happened in New York that forever connected the austere loudspeakers from a remote Arkansas town with an entirely different world. David Mancuso rented a loft at 647 Broadway, not a nightclub, a loft, a residential apartment. On February 14, 1970, Mancuso invited guests to a party called Love Saves the Day. For the sound, Mancuso chose Klipschorn, because the horn system delivered something no other speaker system could. It didn't create sound, it reproduced it, without coloration, without distortion, with a dynamic range that allowed quiet passages to be truly quiet and loud ones truly deafening. That was exactly what Mancuso needed, since he fundamentally refused to use a mixer and played records exactly as musicians had recorded them. The loft parties became legendary. They laid the foundation for modern club culture. Disco, house, all the genres born in New York during the 1970s passed through these speakers, and thousands of people heard the sound of Klipsch at the defining parties of the era, and many of them never even knew what was behind that sound. At that time, Paul Klipsch was living in Hope, Arkansas. He was 66 years old. He may never have set foot in a disco in his life. By the late 1970s, Klipsch and Associates was a recognizable name in the world of high-end sound, but still a small enterprise. Paul Klipsch personally oversaw every production detail. Every Klipschorn was still assembled by hand. Every customer could write a letter to the founder and receive a reply. It wasn't a company in the conventional sense. It was a cult built around one man and his ideas. Paul Klipsch was a genius, but he was a solitary genius. The company stayed small while the entire audio market around it grew, consolidated, and changed. Japanese manufacturers, Sony, Pioneer, Technics, were taking over the mass market. New formats appeared: CDs, home theaters, professional studio monitors. Competitors invested in marketing, expanded their product lines, entered new markets. Klipsch continued doing what it did better than anyone else: corner horn speakers, handmade in Arkansas. In 1985, when the market pressure was already impossible to ignore, the Forte appeared in the lineup, perhaps the most atypical product Klipsch had ever approved. Engineer Gary Gillum proposed using a passive radiator on the rear panel instead of the traditional horn-loaded low-frequency design. Klipsch, who had preached horns and only horns his entire life, agreed, because the result was honest, deep, tight bass from a compact cabinet that fit into a real person's real room. Forte became what the entire lineup should have become long ago in the eyes of the wider public, an entry point that required sacrificing neither sound quality nor apartment layout. Audiophiles still call it the sweet spot of the entire Heritage series. In 1989, when the founder was already 85, he sold the company to his distant relative, Fred Klipsch. It wasn't a retirement in the usual sense. Paul Klipsch remained active for more than another decade afterward. In 2000, at the age of 96, one of his scientific papers was published in the Journal of the Audio Engineering Society. In May 2002, he died in the same town where he had begun. He was 98. Fred Klipsch moved headquarters to Indianapolis and began expanding. It was the right business decision and a painful one in terms of identity. Production of the Heritage series remained in Hope, but the company became different, more commercial, more modern, less like a shed where one man with precise hands and absolute hearing built what he considered honest sound. In 2011, Klipsch Group was sold to Audiovox for $166 million, a figure that makes you think. A man founded the company in a rented shed for $200 a year, and 6 decades later, it was worth $166 million. Later, Audiovox renamed itself Vox International. Then, in 2024, Vox was acquired by Gentex Corporation, a manufacturer of auto-dimming rear-view mirrors. The Heritage series lives on and continues evolving. In 2025, Klipsch introduced the next generation of the Klipschorn AK7 and La Scala AL6. The mass market is a completely different story. Klipsch now makes Flexus soundbars together with Onkyo, the Core 100 for $299 and the Core 200 for $449, both with horn tweeters. There's also the Music City lineup, portable Bluetooth speakers named after Las Vegas, Miami, and New York. The automotive market is another direction entirely. Klipsch systems are installed in the 2025 Nissan Armada, 12 specially designed speakers with titanium tweeters. In the 2025 Infiniti QX80, a 24-speaker system. Every year, Hope hosts the Klipsch Pilgrimage, a pilgrimage in the truest sense. People come from different states and countries, engineers, DJs, audiophiles, simply people who once heard that sound and could never listen to anything else again. They bring records, they listen to music, they eat barbecue and drink moonshine in the very place where it all began. Have you ever owned any Klipsch equipment? Share in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.